19th chapter of Matthew. Last week we were considering the story of the rich young ruler. Now this story is found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and details are given in each of the three accounts that you don't find in the other accounts. For instance, the Luke account is the only one that tells you he's a ruler. Both the Mark and Matthew account says he was young, but the Luke account doesn't mention his being a young man. And in Mark he's called rich, and in Matthew he's said to have many possessions. And then the Lord tells a story of a rich man. But he's directly described as a ruler, as young, and as rich, if you put all three of the accounts together. And as we pointed out before, this is usual. If you find the story more than once in the Bible, you need to read it in each of the accounts in order to get the full story. So let's read this again. We want to make a few other comments. Verse 16 of Matthew 19, "And behold, one came and said unto him, Good master, what good thing shall I do that I may have eternal life? And he said unto him, Why callest thou me good? There is none good but one, and that is God. But if thou wilt enter into life, keep the commandments. And he said unto him, Which? And Jesus said, Thou shalt do no murder, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, honor thy father and thy mother, and thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And the young man saith unto him, All these have I kept from my youth up, and what lack I? Now what Jesus is going to do now is to show him that he has not kept all of these, not in God's eyes anyway. For instance, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. He hasn't kept that one, because one who truly loved his neighbor as himself would not be able to have great possessions. He just couldn't have, because he'd find somebody that needed it worse than he did. And actually, Jesus Christ is the only one that has truly loved his neighbor as himself. And he did that for us, because we couldn't do it. Now, we have an account here of 5 of what we call the 10 Commandments. You may remember that the 10 Commandments were given 3 times through Moses to the nation of Israel. First, he received them orally and came down and recited them to the children of Israel as they are recorded in Exodus chapter 20, and then repeated by Moses for the second generation of Israelites who came out of Egypt in the 5th chapter of Deuteronomy. So in the Old Testament you have the 10 Commandments listed in those 2 places, Exodus chapter 20 and Deuteronomy chapter 5. They are said by God to have been put on 2 tables of stones, or 2 stone tablets. For after Moses had come down and delivered the 10 Commandments to the children of Israel, they said, All that God says we shall do. And then Moses went back up, did I call him Abraham? Moses went back up in the mountain, and you're supposed to correct me if I say it wrong, all right? He went back up into the mountain again, and God fashioned these 2 tables of stone, and then wrote on them. And it's thought that he wrote 4 commandments on one and 6 on the other. Now this is because the first 4 have to do with man's relationship and his responsibility towards God, and the last 6 have to do with his responsibility towards his fellow human beings. And when they're divided, they're given in these 2 groups, 4 in one group and 6 in another group. Of course, you'll remember that the first commandment was broken before Moses ever got back to share them with the children of Israel. And so Moses broke the tables of stone. And then he was called back up in the mountain again, and this time Moses fashioned the tables of stone, and God wrote on them. And of course, all this has significance. But what we wanted to point out here is that these commandments that we have listed here in Matthew chapter 19 are all from the 2nd tablet. That is to say, they all have to do with man's responsibility towards man. And we have here one of the 6 not listed is thou shalt not covet, and instead he has put this commandment, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Now this that you see in verse 19, this is not listed as one of the 10 commandments in this way, but we're told several places in the Bible that this one sums up all of the ones that have to do with our relationship to one another. And so it summarizes the others, including, in other words, when the Lord listed it here, he chose to end up with this. Now, in one of the other accounts, it's not given. But you can see why he did this. If you want to hold your place here in Matthew 19 and turn to the book of Romans, chapter 13, you see another listing there of the of these commandments that were written on the second table of stone in Romans chapter 13, verse 8. Owe no man anything but to love one another, for he that loveth another has fulfilled the law. In other words, if you truly love another person, you are manifesting the law. Verse 9, for this thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. Now here it is. And if there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended in this saying, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. In the book of James, chapter 2, this commandment, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, is called the golden, the royal commandment, that is. It's called the golden rule is the terminology, or a similar statement, but it's called the royal commandment in the book of James. It's repeated over and over again. It's first found in Leviticus chapter 19. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, in Leviticus 19:18. And then we find it repeated again and again. And where it's repeated in the New Testament, it's said to fulfill all of our responsibility. Remember, when someone asks Christ what is the first and great commandment, he says the first and great commandment is thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy mind. And then Mark, I believe, also adds strength. And a second is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And so these two summarize the 10 commandments, see? When you said thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and all thy soul and all thy mind, that's a summary of the first 4. And thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself is given as a summary of the last 6. So this is carried out, of course, in what we just read. I just want to make those few comments about the 10 commandments as they're given in the New Testament. Now, only the last 6, only the second 6 are given to us directly or as a matter of instruction after the death and resurrection of Christ. You see, today we please God only in Christ. We're accepted in the Beloved. And our only relationship between us and God is in Christ. To the extent that we yield to Him, then we are manifesting His love for the Father. So our responsibility towards God is no longer thou shalt, but yield to the Son, and let this mind be in you which was also in Christ Jesus. And then it explains that He came from the glories on high, and He yielded Himself to become the servant of all. So our responsibility towards God is in Christ, through Christ, yieldedness to Him. So nowhere in the after the death and resurrection of Christ will you see anybody instructed in line with the first 4 of the 10 commandments. I don't know if you'd ever noticed that before. But all of the 6 that have to do with one another are repeated throughout the New Testament. We saw them there in Romans, didn't we? Listed. And then you'll find them other places. For instance, the one that's not listed in Romans is to be found both in the book of Colossians and in Ephesians. Remember, Ephesians is in chapter 6, the verse that says, honor thy father and thy mother. This is the first commandment with a promise. So, that thy days may be long upon the earth, that is to say. So these that have to do with one another, we still have a responsibility in those. Now, not unto condemnation, if what we're doing is we're realizing that this is God's instructions towards us, or to us, when we exercise our actions one to another. Now, in the book of 1 John, it tells you that you fulfill all of these in loving one another, or again and again we're told that. We saw it in Matthew. Well, you see it again, for instance, in Galatians, and you see it in 1 John several times, that loving one another is the fulfillment of all the law, of all the commandments, in regards to our activity to one another. Now, we pointed out last week that although we are not under the law, although we are not under the Ten Commandments, we are not free from law, because we are under a higher law, and that law is called by three names in the New Testament. It's called the law of Christ, it's called the law of love, and it's called the perfect law of liberty. That is to say, it's our responsibility to seek the mind of Christ, to act like He does. And God keeps reminding us of these 6 commandments on the other tablet to say our being like Christ one towards the other, and this is the thing we can see. You see, our relationship towards God, it can really only be seen between God and ourselves, can't it? I mean, actually, because God doesn't really accept any attitude towards Him except a heart relationship. Anyway, the outward show of what our allegiance might be to God is not measured by God anyway. It's our heart relationship. But we still manifest our carrying out the perfect law of liberty, the law of love, the law of Christ, through following these 10 commandments that have been outlined. So when somebody says the 10 commandments are of no more effect on the Christian, that's only true in one respect. It's true in the respect that Jesus came and fulfilled all the commandments for us perfectly, and we exult in that. We say, glory to God, because I have no more responsibility before God for fulfilling the 10 commandments. Jesus did that for me, and my responsibility to now is to seek to have the mind of Christ. And it is not in a do this and do that and don't do that. But you see, I still have a responsibility, a manifested responsibility towards those that are around me. And God keeps reminding me of this all through the New Testament. And here again, it's not because God gave the law. It's not you do this or else. Christ did this for me also. But it's my privilege to manifest the fact that I seek to be like Christ in showing forth my relationship to other people God's ways. So to say that the law has no more effect on us whatsoever is not to tell the whole story. It's really true in a sense, but it's not telling the whole story. If it were, God wouldn't keep repeating those laws in Romans, in Galatians, in Ephesians, and in 1 John, and in all of these places. He wants to keep bringing them to my remembrance. This is his standard of conduct. Now, the 7th chapter of Romans tell me that if I seek to obey these laws individually, I'll be frustrated. It says, if I dwell on thou shalt not covet, that'll make me covetous. It incites me to covetousness. And if I go around all my life, thou shalt not steal, I'll want to steal. Or thou shalt not do this, because it stirs up my flesh within me. But if I go around, I want to be like Jesus. He fulfilled the law for me, and I want to be like Him. Then I am following. I'm seeking after the perfect law of love, the perfect law of liberty. I have liberty to do whatever I please I have that liberty. But I'm known as one of his because I please to do like he does. Now, I don't know if you quite see that or not, but it's true, because it is true that we have perfect liberty in Christ. And we need to say this: to whom much is given is much required. So when God gives us perfect liberty, then we have a responsibility, don't we? Just like if we live in a country that has a degree of freedom, we have a responsibility. Someone that doesn't appreciate freedom really doesn't deserve freedom, does he? And liberty. Well, let's see what else we can learn from this young man, beginning with verse 20. The young man saith unto him, All these things have I kept from my youth up. What lack I yet? And Jesus said, If thou would be perfect, go and sell what thou hast, and give to the poor, and thou shalt have treasure in heaven. Come and follow me. And when the young man heard that saying, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. Then said Jesus unto his disciples, Verily I say unto you, that a rich man shall with difficulty or hardly enter into the kingdom of heaven. And again I say unto you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. And when his disciples heard it, they were exceedingly amazed, saying, Who then can be saved? And Jesus beheld them, and said unto them, With men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. So then, the answer to this fact, the answer to the fact, can a rich person be saved? All things are possible with God. And we find out, well, what does he mean about this matter of going through the eye of a needle? Well, if we read the Mark account, which we did last week, we would see. For there, it makes it, it says, for the man who trusts in riches. It's impossible to get to heaven placing your trust in your riches or your position or possessions. That's an impossibility for man to try to do it. Now, if you've read many comments on this particular parable, you've read, the story about how in the wall of an eastern city there was a certain gate that was smaller than the rest of them, because it would be easily guarded. All the rest of the gates were closed at night, and then the little gate was left open, and because only one person could get through at a time, and a camel couldn't get through it unless the camel kneeled down and they took his burden off of him, and then on his knees he could go through the eye of the needle. And they say that door was called the eye of the needle, because the camel couldn't get through it unless he got rid of his burden. And that's supposed to be a picture of the fact that you can't get into heaven unless you get rid of all of your load and paraphernalia and kneel down. And if so, you humbly kneel down and let the Lord lift all of your possessions off of you, then you can go through the little gate, the eye of the needle. How many have heard that story or a similar one? See, quite a few of us. And I'm often asked, well, is that true? Well, as far as I know, I've never been able to find anywhere any verifying statement that there's ever been an eastern city with that type of a gate. Now, maybe you have. If you have, as a truism, well, anyone they've dug up, certainly the walls of Jerusalem, they haven't found such a gate in building it up. But maybe you know of something, and so I won't deny it as being. I won't say that that's a fanciful story, but I'll say I don't know of its veracity. We'll put it that way. Maybe somebody else does. But I think the Lord, just as he did quite frequently, he wanted to make it look ridiculous when he says, for instance, that they swallow a camel and strain in a gnat. Well, he wants you to get the picture of a fella, two people here. And here's a guy that's got his mouth wide open, and he's walking up to a great big full-grown camel, and he's opened his mouth like he's going to swallow that camel. And then here's a guy over here, a little tiny gnat comes, and here he is just choking to death because he's got a gnat caught in his throat. The Lord wants you to see that picture. I remember one time a theologian said to me, he says, you know, you talk as though you take the Bible literally. And I say, well, I do. And he says, you do, huh? And he says, well, tell me this. Did you ever see anybody swallow a camel? And I says, I never saw a camel except in the zoo. And he says, well, doesn't the Bible say that someone was swallowing a camel? And I said, well, not exactly, but I know what you're talking about. And he says, well, do you think that's meant to be taken literally? And I said, yes. I think that Jesus wanted you to have a full view in your mind's eye of a camel and somebody trying to swallow it, to show you how ridiculous the situation was. And I think the same thing's true here. He wanted you to see a sewing needle, get a picture of it, and then, in your mind's eye, try to put a camel through it. It won't work. And I believe that's the picture. I don't believe he had in mind some little gate where the camel's got to kneel down and get the load off of him, and then he can, on his knees, I don't even know if a camel can crawl on his knees. But anyway, that's how the story goes. I'm sorry to mess up somebody's cute story. Or maybe I didn't. Anyway. So it's impossible. As a matter of fact, it's impossible for a man to get to heaven anyway. But we seem to get the idea that you can get almost anything with money or position. And so that's the one that needs to be pointed out, that won't do it. Now, the Lord's going to continue this subject matter. Let's go on to the 27th verse. Then answered Peter and said unto him, Behold, we have forsaken all and have followed thee. What shall we have therefore? And Jesus said unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, that ye who have followed me in the generation when the Son of Man shall sit on the throne of his glory, ye shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And everyone, now that was for the disciples. Don't anybody here think they're going to be sitting on one of the 12 thrones, judging one of the 12 tribes of Israel in the kingdom. That's somebody else's job. Yeah, old Matthew will have one of those thrones, and John will have one, and even Bartholomew will have one. But you won't. Not one of those, at least. But there is something for you, too. And he says in verse 29, And everyone that have forsaken houses or brethren or sisters or fathers or mother or wife or children or lands for my name's sake shall receive 100-fold and shall inherit everlasting life. But many that are first, like the rich young ruler was here, shall be last, and the last shall be first. Now, in every generation, some of God's people misunderstand what Christ is teaching here in this verse. I know right now of a dear brother whose wife honestly and sincerely believes that the Lord has called her to preach the gospel. And she has, she's sure that this is speaking to her, and she's supposed to leave her husband and her children and her home, and she's supposed to go to the far ends of the earth and preach the gospel, you know. And because she wants to have 100-fold and have everlasting life. So here she goes. Pitiful, but that's the way some of us look at those things. Well, on the face of it, we should realize that that's not what he's saying. And I suppose, remember when we were studying this matter of marriage and divorce, we found the scripture in the 7th chapter of 1 Corinthians when it says, I say unto you that are married, depart not from your husband or your wife. This is one of the reasons that he said that. Paul said that. He didn't want this confused. Now, the Lord does call some to forsake their place, their home temporarily, and in some cases some of these things, it doesn't mean everybody's supposed to forsake his house, and everybody his brother, and everybody his sister, and everybody his father. But it means that all of God's people may be called upon to forsake in one of these areas. And there is a sense in which every one of us are called to forsake every one of these items. There's a sense in which I am called by Christ to forsake my house, to forsake my brethren, to forsake my sisters, to forsake my father, to forsake my mother, my wife, my children, my lands, all of that. Because Jesus said, except I deny myself and take up the cross daily and follow him, that I cannot be his disciple. That is to say, I must absolutely and positively put him and the gospel above anybody or anything and pursue that job that the Lord gives me in that respect regardless. But he will not lead me in contradiction to the rest of his word. And he tells me, for instance, those who provide not for their own, especially those in their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. He said, work with your own hands and eat your own bread. You see, you can't take any verse and build your life on it. You've got to mesh all the verses together. And admittedly, many times, the Bible, on the face of it, contradicts itself. As a matter of fact, when a poor unsaved person comes to you and say, well, I can't believe the Bible, it contradicts itself. Of course, what you can do is say, oh, no, the Bible never contradicts itself. But I'll tell you something better to say. Hey, you're right. It does. Over and over again. To the natural mind. It takes God's Spirit to mesh some of those seeming enigmas one to the other. And it's a thrilling operation to have him to do that for you. And he will. He'll take every one of those contradictions, which are certainly there, to the natural mind. For instance, and you can even name some of them. One place, Jesus is called the Prince of Peace. He's the only one that'll bring peace. And then he says again, I come not to bring peace. Both of those things are true. And they're contradictory in the natural reasoning. But in the Spirit of God they aren't. So this is a good opportunity to witness. One of the best opportunities. If you're doing much witnessing, you're receiving that lot. People are telling you there's contradictions in the Bible. And the very best answer, I'm sure, is to say that's right. There certainly are. And then name some of them. You ought to be able to find them. And then you're right on his side of the fence, see? I guess I'll have to tell this story. I used to have a friend that liked to go hunting. And if they ever came to a barbed wire fence, you don't have many of those around anymore, we used to have a lot of them, the dog wouldn't come near the barbed wire fence. It was because previously, when they'd come to a barbed wire fence, the master would get over the fence, and then he'd reach over by the dog's collar and lift him over. Well, one time he didn't lift him high enough, and so the poor old dog got his underside scored all up with that barbed wire fence. And there was no way in the world to get that dog across a fence anymore. He learned his lesson forever. And so what he'd have to do, he'd have to go around to the fence, the dog side of the fence, and then he'd have to walk along that fence till he found either the end of the barbed wire fence or a gate or something, because there was no getting that dog over that fence. And he was a good hunting dog, you know, but just for that. Well, you see, that's what we need to do. When we're leading people to Christ, we're always we're on one side of the fence, and they're on the other side, but there's barbs on that fence, see? And we want to reach over there and say, hey, you're on the wrong side of the fence, get on my side, and we yank them across the fence and just scratch them all up with a barbed wire. And what we need to do is to go back over on their side of the fence and lead them around. Maybe it's the long way around, but lead them over onto our side and not quit trying to haul them across that fence like that. And so this is what we're talking about. Is talking his language. But we say, you're just full of stuff. You don't even know anything about it. You know, no, there ain't not so any contradictions in the Bible. Well, you see, that's sort of contradictory there, because yes, there are contradictions in the Bible. No, there aren't any contradictions in the Bible. Both of those things are true. Everybody got the point? Now, starting in the 20th chapter, we have a parable. And this is another one of those parables about the kingdom of heaven. And this is a story about a vineyard. Now, primarily, the vineyard is Israel. If you have any doubts about the fact that Israel is the vineyard, I'll give you some scriptures to read. Israel is the vineyard in Psalm 80. And the psalmist Asaph tells us that. Israel is the vineyard in Isaiah chapter 5. It says it right in the textual material. And that theme is followed through by Jeremiah, by Ezekiel, and by Hosea. All of those prophets tell you that God's vineyard is the nation of Israel. But whatever applies to the nation of Israel corporately applies to us individually. And of course we're told that. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11, all of these things happened unto them. Unto who? Unto Israel. For examples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. So, when we find that something applies primarily to Israel, we don't stop there. We say there's a lesson in there for me too. Now, this is the first of 3 parables. 1, 2, 3, right here in Matthew. There's one here in the 20th chapter, and 2 more in the 21st chapters. In these 2 chapters, there are 3 parables about the vineyard. And we'll be taking them one at a time. They each teach a different aspect of a certain truth, something that's going on while the kingdom is in abeyance, or while the kingdom is not being manifested. Now, this parable of the vineyard has 2 other parallel parables. We'll tell you this one, and then you'll recognize that there are 2 other parables. Not about, the other 2 aren't about a vineyard, but they tell similar truths. Now, the story here was that there was a man that had a vineyard, and he needed someone to go out and reap in the vineyard. So he went out early in the morning. Back in those days, the work day started at 6 in the morning and ended at 6 at night. In Israel, it's close enough towards the equator that, about like it is here, the days are fairly nearly, I mean, not exactly even, but it's not like it is up north where you have very long nights in the winter and very long days in the summer. Anyway, the work day was 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And so he went out very early in the morning. At 6 a.m. he got some laborers, and he went out into the vineyard and put them to work. Then he went back into the village, in the town, about 9 o'clock in the morning, and found some other laborers, and he sent them out there. Now, the first ones, he told them that he would pay them a penny. It's translated a penny in the King James Version. It's a denarius, which is a word in the original language which meant a day's wage. And so what he bargained with them, he says, you work this full day and I will pay you, at the end of the day, I will pay you a day's wage. And so when he went out later in the day, he saw some others, and he asked them if they would like to work, and they said yes. And so in verse 5, you see, again, he went out about the 6th hour, that's at noontime, at 9th hour, 3 in the afternoon, and did the same. And then, verse 6, and about the 11th hour, that's 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found others standing idle, and saith unto them, why do you stand here all day idle? And they said unto him, because nobody's hired us. And he said unto them, go also into the vineyard, and whatever is right you shall receive. Then tell them how much they get. So then when the evening was come, in verse 8, The Lord of the vineyard said unto his stewards, Call the laborers and give them their hire, beginning from the last unto the first. Now this has a significance. See up in the last verse of the previous chapter, but many that are first shall be last, and the last shall be first. And then look at verse 16. So the last shall be first, and the first shall be last. You have this phraseology 3 times. One before he starts the story, once in the middle of the story, and then again at the end of the story. Verse 9, And when they came that were hired about the 11th hour, they received every man a penny, or a denarius, or 1 day's labor. They'd only worked for an hour, but they received a day's pay. But when the first came, they supposed that they should have received more, and they likewise received every man 1 day's wage. And when they had received it, they murmured against the good man of the house, or the householder, saying, These last have wrought but 1 hour, and thou hast made them equal unto us, who have borne the burden and the heat of the day. Now notice, they didn't complain that he paid them too little. They complained that he paid the others too much. Their complaint was, you gave them more than you should have given them. They didn't say, you didn't give us our share. Because you see, they had had an agreement. Look at verse 2. And when he had agreed with the laborers. This is not the complaint at all. But he answered one of them and said, Friend, I do thee no wrong. Didn't you agree with me for 1 denarius, or 1 penny? Take what is thine, and go thy way. I will give unto this last, even as unto thee. Is it not lawful for me to do what I will do with mine own? Is thine eye evil, because I am good? You see, everybody will know that the Lord has given them all they deserve, and then some. Some of us may wonder why he will bestow so much on some others. We won't wonder why he didn't give us more. We'll know that we got all we deserved, at least. But we'll say, my, wonder why that one's getting so much honor. You see, that's how we think. And you think about this in raising children. You give all of your children something, and then you try giving something to one of them that you didn't give to the others. Their complaint won't be that they deserved more. No. Their complaint will be, he got more than he deserved. And then what is this parable teaching us? First, it's teaching us that God thinks differently than we think. He has a right to bestow as much as he wants to upon anybody he pleases. And we don't have any right to say he shouldn't do that. He'll be just with everybody. But he'll decide. He made one angel an archangel. When you get to heaven, you're not going to find every single angel. Every angel is equally faithful to God. You'll not find a single angel in all of glory that isn't 100% dedicated and faithful to his Lord. But they're not all equal in every respect. They're in echelons of power and importance. And it'll be that way in glory. And it won't necessarily be based on who worked the longest. All right, there's another truth that this tells us. It tells us that the soul that is saved very late in life has the same opportunity in the presence of God, and this should be very comforting to those of us that came to the Lord later in life. Now, I've even heard young people complain. Well, I wished I had waited and got saved when I was older so I could have had some fun while I'm young, you see. And because I know I'm not supposed to do that. And look at that old codger, he lived it up, had a lot of fun, now he got saved late in life. Well, this is the way we tend to think, you know. But what this parable is telling us is that the one who's saved late in life may, in God's mind, be worthy of just the same as the one who served him all of their life. Now remember, Why was it that these got the same amount? Why weren't they working all day? Why didn't these ones that started working at 5 o'clock in the evening, why didn't they work all day? Because they didn't know the opportunity existed, did they? Wasn't that their reason? So you see, it wasn't that they refused to work. Now, there's some of us will be in that position. We refuse to come to God all of our lives. And that's not what this parable is talking about. Or we came to Christ when we were very young, and we refused to yield to Him until late in life. It's not talking about that. It's talking about opportunity. And it'll work just fine if you'll put it with the other two of these parables I'm talking about. Now, we won't look them up, because we'll be getting into this some more when we get to the 25th chapter of Matthew, because in the 25th chapter you have the parable of the talents. You've heard of new math? Well, in the parable of the talents you have old math. Old math is works like this. 1 plus 0 equals 0, and 5 plus 5 equals 11. That's old math. See, you'll remember the story of the talents, that one was given 5 talents, and he increased it to 10. Another was given 2 talents, and he increased it to 4. And another was given 1 talent, and he didn't do anything with it. And so that 1 talent was taken away from him and given to the guy that had 10. So 5 and 5 equal 11. Nothing equals 0. Isn't that right? What does that teach? Well, the real lesson there is between the guy that got the 5 and the guy that got the 2. God does not choose to gift us all in the same way. And He has the same commendation exactly for the one who's faithful. When the one had 5 talents, then he got 5 more talents, Jesus says, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Enter ye into the joy of the Lord." He said exactly those same words to the guy that increased his 2 talents, doubled them. But it was the fellow with the 5 talents that received the extra one. Now, what does all that teach us? It teaches us that the commendation of the Lord is based upon the faithfulness of our stewardship and not the amount of the gain. But position, God foreknows position, just here again, like our angels and archangels. There's going to be strata of position and throughout the eternal ages, governmentally. And God will choose to give the most responsibility to the one who has the most capacity to fulfill the responsibility. And nobody else will be downgraded because of that, because based on faithfulness, the commendation will be the same. You took what God gave you, and you doubled it, or you used it to its fullest extent. That's what it's teaching. And so you were commended in the same way. So in one sense, we'll all be treated exactly alike to the extent of our faithfulness. And yet, we won't be all positioned the same in eternal ages. That's a truth that's taught by that parable. It's a different truth than it's taught here. And then in the 19th chapter of Luke, you have the parable of the pounds. There you had 10 servants, and they were each given 1 pound. And the first one, how many pounds do you have now when the Lord came back, when his stewardship was taken into account? Well, I have 10. He says, then you will have 10 cities to rule over in the kingdom. And the next one had 5. You'll have 5 cities to rule over in the kingdom. And then the guy, one, well, I didn't do anything with it. I still got the 1. And here again, the 1 was taken from him and given to the fellow that had 10. And somebody complained. Well, he's already got 10. Why is he getting another one? Well, you see, that again teaches it emphasizes this part, that we have different capacities. And this last parable, though, it emphasizes this, that even if we're given all exactly the same, to which in some extent we are, we're all put on the same plane when God gives us eternal life, when we're saved, that we have different degrees of diligence. Some takes 1 and makes 5 out of it. Some takes 1 and makes 10 out of it. You can put it another way. One fellow may get saved and lead 5 other people to Christ. One guy might get saved and lead 10 other people to Christ. For no other reason than he's more diligent. And so this tells us that one of the things that God is going to base position on is on diligence, not on length of service. Because there was no discrepancy in length of service here. That picture is given over in the other one, where there was a difference in length of service. But here, you see, they all served for the same length of time, and they were all given, they were put on an even basis, exactly, every way. Given of the 1 talent or the 1 pound apiece, the idea is there is a sense on which all of God's children are put on an even basis. And but any 2 of us put on an even basis will not necessarily perform with equal diligence. And God will take that into account. That's what the 10 pounds, the parable of the pounds, teach. The parable of the talents teaches that we have different degrees of capacity. And part of what God's eternal program is going to be based upon the degree to which we utilize our capacity. So, because although He puts us on the same level, we don't all have the same capacity. On the one hand, neither do we all exercise the same diligence on the other. But all those truths fit into God's plans. Here, the lesson, when it's applied to us, says that the recompense, the reward, shall not be based on the length of time that you served in the vineyard. If you served diligently while you had the opportunity. Now, there's many ramifications on that. You might say, well, when did I first have the opportunity? And I don't know. Only God can measure that. As best I know, I came to God the first opportunity I had after He spoke to my heart, after I really knew. Now, I don't know what was wrong with me. That I know I'd heard the gospel before. And so I don't know what was wrong with me. It wasn't God. It was certainly something wrong with me that I didn't hear with a hearing ear before. So I don't know how much responsibility I have. Don't worry about it. I know this, that as soon as it pierced my brain that God was calling me to Himself and dealing with me, I immediately began to consider that. And I considered it for 3 days, and then I yielded. Now, as I say, I don't know what responsibility I had for yielding to Him when I heard the gospel sometime before, but had no sense of being really called. I can remember years before I was saved listening to Billy Graham programs because I thought he was a crackerjack salesman. And I knew that he swayed people, and I could get some good ideas, and I was studying him from what he would do and say to cause those people to respond. And the gospel message had absolutely no effect on me whatsoever. I don't know why. And I don't know to the extent that it was my fault, you see. I don't know that, and I don't try to figure it out. As best I know, when God laid it out to me so I understood it, I said, okay. And I was 35. And I don't know to what extent I'll be held responsible for the lack of being a steward before I was 35. I don't know that. And I don't worry about it. But I know God will be fair about it. And I know this, that I have just as much opportunity in whatever years I have left. I know this now. I have just as much opportunity in whatever years I have left as my son David that got saved when he was 5 years old. You see, it works both ends of that. There's some people not going to be saved very long before the Lord comes, and they're not going to have much opportunity for sure. lengthwise, are they? That's going to be like if they were hired at 6 o'clock in the morning, and then at 7 o'clock, the vineyard owner came back and said, well, that's all, boys. We're quitting, knocking off. They didn't have any opportunity of serving on. One day the Lord's going to say that. That's all. Whatever you hadn't done up to now, that's it. Well, the one that was faithful from the time he was saved until that day, he's going to have the same opportunity. That's what this story we have in the 20th chapter is telling us. And some that we would think would be first will be last, and some that will be last will be first. Now, in some way, the Lord of this harvest was able to detect that those who started late actually were more to be commended than the ones that started early. It had nothing to do with their diligence and labor. It had to do with their heart attitude. And that's why he called them up first, to receive their recompense. And then he called the others up last. For the first shall be last, and the last shall be first, in more ways than one. All of these parables, you see, have wonderful, wonderful lessons for us, and they each teach us of a different aspect. And if you try to get the meaning out of one without comparing it to all else that God says on the same subject, you're going to end up in confusion, and you'll probably end up starting another denomination, and we got enough of them. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you again for the opportunity to search out your word. And Lord, we thank you for giving us a degree of spirituality that we might discern what you say, and we not be confined to what the natural mind reasons. And I thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.